Good morning, Venture. You know, living in California, especially Northern California, sometimes get disconnected from things that are going on in other parts of the country. Was reminded of that this morning even. This is hurricane season. And there's a hurricane down in the Caribbean, Hurricane Melissa, that they think is going to reach Category 5. And so pray for the people of Jamaica and those who are there in it. And as you look at it, especially the power of a hurricane, I'm always fascinated. I don't think we realize how much power it takes to sustain, to generate a hurricane of that force. A Category 5 is about 157 mile an hour wind. And so you think of the devastation of that. But just the power to keep a hurricane fueled. In fact, as scientists compared it, over the course of just a normal hurricane, it's equivalent to 200 times the total electrical generating capacity of the planet. If you took everything on the planet and you were trying to generate enough power, it would take more than 200 times what we can generate to do one hurricane. In fact, it said in it, a hurricane expends as much energy as 10,000 nuclear bombs. Again, the force in that. And these hurricanes that come through, this one, Melissa, some of the ones, depending on their path, depending on the devastation, they can leave a mark. You go to different parts of the country, they remember the names well. I mean, you go down to New Orleans and mention Hurricane Katrina, and many people have memories of the devastation of that. Or go down to the coast and Hurricane Camille or Hugo. They used to just name them after women. I'm glad it's now equal opportunity. It's not fair. With that. It's those ones that immediately when you say that, they go, oh, I remember that storm. Oh, I remember what happened through that. And the same is true in life. We may not name it the same way, but there's several joint experiences all of us has had, or different times of life, where you go, yeah, I remember that storm. What about Hurricane COVID? Anybody remember that one? Yeah, we were like, oh, yeah. Or the 2008 recession. Talk to people that, man, I lost my house or lost everything we own in it. Or it gets more personal at times. You can remember the storm of cancer. You go, oh yeah, I remember going through that. Or the storm of a marriage that fell apart despite your efforts and the impact of it. Troubles in family or trouble with finances. These storms that mark us and shape us. What I love about the passage today, it's a short story. In fact, if you've got your Bibles, Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4, at the end of Mark chapter 4, we're going to read through just a few verses in it. But we're reaching a section of Mark where Mark is walking us through the power of Jesus. The power of Jesus. We're going to see next week a very dramatic story of Jesus' power over the demonic realm, and teach a little bit about demons and Satan and that realm and Jesus' power over it, not only in the story, but what does Scripture teach us. And we see his power over disease. We see his power even over death with it. This week, he's going to teach us Jesus' power over not just the storms of life, the actual storms of life. And the advantage in one way, for many of us, we know these stories well. If this is your first time with it, you're in for a treat. I love going through the Gospels and all of these stories with it. But for all of us, to just step back again and be reminded who Jesus is and what he takes us through. Read with me in Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. On that day when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. They're situated right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And just to remind you, the last several weeks we've said this, Jesus is at a point in his ministry where the pace is absolutely frenetic. There are so many people coming. There's so many people that want something. There's so many people that want him to teach or to heal. And it says several times in it, he doesn't have the time to stop and eat. He doesn't have the time to get any rest. So much so that his family shows up and they say, we've got to do an intervention. This is getting out of hand. And Jesus looks up at his disciples as this crowd is pressed in, and they're at the Sea of Galilee. He says, hey, let's get in a boat. We need to go to the other side. We can't sustain at this level. If you read with me in verse 36, and leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were trying to follow. They're right there with him. And a great windstorm arose, and waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was filling. And so they're there on the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee, it's not huge. It's only 13 miles by about 7.5 miles. It's interesting how it's situated, though. It's about 680 feet below sea level. And surrounding it, it's like it's in the center of a bowl. Surrounding it are the hillsides, even the mountains. And the hills are about 2,000 feet above the water. So you think of the sea that's at the bottom of a bowl, 2,000 feet hills all the way around it. Because of that, and because of the way the sea is situated, it's a shallow sea in many of the areas, but then it goes deep in others. And because of that, it creates warm water across the surface for the most part, but several areas where there's cold water pockets. And being in that bowl, there's this phenomena that happens where these winds that can come, especially from the north, these winds that will come down called Sharkia, and these winds will blow and then storms can move in, and it changes the atmospheric pressure so quickly that what is a calm sea can suddenly be a massive storm. And that's what's happened here as they head across the sea. Now, as you hear this, there's a part of it that you can go, if you knew you were going to get in a boat and you're going to start off across the sea and you're going to hit a storm so bad that your boat starts filling with water, you're about to sink. Was it a mistake to get in the boat? Was it a mistake to take the trip? Well, whose idea was it to take the trip? Before we ascribe a mistake to it, we might need to recognize who came up with the idea. And I say this because following Jesus doesn't exempt you from the storms. In fact, it often leads you right into them. It was Jesus' idea, let's go to the other side. It was Jesus that led them out in it. Now, these guys, especially Peter, James, Andrew, John, they're all fishermen. They all know this. They know this sea like the back of their hand. They're like, oh, good, yeah, this is our domain. We can take care of this. Little did they know that following Jesus is going to actually lead them right into the storm. And I say this because a lot of times without even consciously thinking it, at some point, I'll talk to Christians and I'll do it in my own life. We get in our minds this kind of deal that we have with God that as long as I'm faithful, as long as I'm doing the right things, as long as I'm having my quiet time and I'm, no major issues in life and I'm being faithful to Him. So if I put in enough faithfulness, He's supposed to give me a life without these kind of storms. It's supposed to kind of work out. And when it doesn't, and when the storm comes, man, it can be very disorienting. You can look at it and you go, wait, why is this happening to me? Now, sometimes it may happen because of your disobedience. God can use that to chasten us. It's often because we live in a life full of storms and we follow a Savior who will actually lead us into them. I love how Chuck Swindoll puts it. He says, sometimes the will of God will take you where the grace of God must sustain you. Sometimes God's will leads you to the very place where you need His grace more. And before you write it off, you go, well, what good does it mean to be faithful? If faithfulness doesn't protect you from the storms, hey, faithfulness doesn't prevent storms, but it prepares you for them. It prepares you for them. Because here's the reality, they're going to come in every life, not to the same severity. I had somebody after first service, I loved his honesty. He goes, I don't think I've had any major storms like that. And I said, you don't have to live, waiting, it's coming any second. Some people live that way. And not everybody experiences the same kind of storms. As you talk, though, you find out you've probably been through more than you realized with it. And God is actually preparing you through each of the storms of life to be able to trust Him more in that. so that we can respond in the way that we should. Now, in this story, the disciples' immediate response is fear. They're afraid. And I want us to be careful, because especially those of us who've been in the church, all our lives, we can kind of look at the disciples always with this level of condescension. Oh, the disciples were afraid. Don't they trust Jesus? And I just put yourself in their situation. You ever been in a storm like that? You ever been in a storm at sea? These guys are sailors, by the way. They're fishermen. They know this sea. They don't scare real easy. One of the things I love about living in Northern California is the weather, because we don't have weather here, okay? And for those of you who are from here, no, we don't. I'll just tell you with it. In fact, Lee will tell me sometimes she misses the 4 seasons. She's like, I miss the weather of the 4 seasons. I'm like, I don't need any more seasons the rest of my life. I love it here. At most, I like, oh, do I take a jacket today? And even if I don't, oh, okay, it's all right. I mean, I really, the only people I feel for is the poor weather people. You ever see the weather people on the news? They have nothing to talk about. They have to come up with like microclimates. It's 68 here, but it's 72 here. Oh, okay, woohoo. Yeah, horrible. How will they survive? We don't have storms here. Now, when we lived in the South, I grew up with storms, and they're real storms. It's thunderstorms and tornadoes. And we have tornado season. Like, just during that time, the tornadoes that come through, and they're devastating and pick up houses. Everything that you see, it's beyond what you can imagine when a true tornado comes through. And so, when I was a little kid, they didn't have quite the technology. All we had was, if a tornado was in the county, the alarms went off. And so you knew one was somewhere, and you kind of hunkered down with it. The technology got better over time. Now they can trace it they see the cells that are coming. And so if you're in the South and tornadoes coming, it'll suddenly come on your news. You see it there. They're tracing the different ones. They'll tell you the path of it. We had a house in Arkansas, one of our houses. We had this big pantry right in the center of the kitchen. And determined is probably the safest part of the house. And so when a tornado was coming, and the alarm's going, we were checking with it. We'd get all the kids were little, and everybody would get in this pantry together, kind of hunker up. Except I would stay out and watch the news just to see the path and see how close it was getting. I remember one time I'm sitting there watching, Lee's with all the kids in there, and suddenly they were showing the path, and I was like, oh, that's our neighborhood. And so I go over and I get in the pantry. And suddenly Drew looks up at me. He's a little guy, and he's like, what are you doing in here? I was like, what do you mean when I'm in here? We're all together with it. And then finally you can see the wheels turning with all of them. They're like, wait, if you're in here, that means it's coming for us. And then finally one of them just kind of screamed out, Dad's in the pantry. We're all gonna die. I'll never forget. Lee grabbed me and she said, I love you, but you have to get out. Like, oh, great. Leave the safety of the pantry with it. The disciples are at that place in the boat. It says the waves are coming over the side of the boat, and they're at the we're all going to die phase. And as they look at Jesus, it's a mixture of fear and frustration that's building. Because look at Jesus in verse 38. Where's Jesus? He was in the stern. He's in the back of the boat, asleep on the cushion. Now, I think often we treat this story like he's doing some kind of divine trick in the back. Like he's in the back of the boat. He's not really asleep. He's like, I'm trying to teach them a lesson, so I'm going to pretend like I'm asleep. No, guys, he's asleep. He's exhausted. That's why he said, let's get in the boat to begin with. He has literally been doing nonstop feeding and healing and facing darkness and demons, and he hadn't had time for food or sleep or anything else. This is a great picture that our God, when he came, he was fully human. And despite a storm of this magnitude, he is sound asleep because he's exhausted. And they keep looking over at him like, is he still asleep? He's still asleep? Does he not know what's going on? Look, as they finally turned to him, they woke him and they said to him, look at the words here. Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? Do you not even care that we're dying here? And I think it's the raw emotion that, if we're honest, we all feel in the storms. We all feel with God. As you look at it, fear and frustration lead to the same questions. And the core question is, don't you care? Don't you care what we're facing? Don't you care what's going on? Don't you care how much we're losing? What this means? And maybe the hardest part of the whole experience, C.S. Lewis said it was. Some of the rawest writing that he did was after his wife died of cancer. And as he started wrestling with the truths that he had taught in Mere Christianity and other places, in this season of life, and he said the hardest part was, man, I went to knock on the door and it felt like God had closed the door and shut the shades and turned off the lights. It's like, are you even home? Do you even see this? And our hearts go to a place of, God, if you cared, you would be doing something. That's what we're saying in that moment. If you cared, you would do what we think you should do. And when he's inactive, we immediately start questioning, and we don't trust as much. Here's the key that you see in this. Jesus' inactivity is not because he doesn't care. It's because he's actually completely at peace. He has enough peace in the situation. He's asleep. He has enough peace, and where does he have that peace? He has peace in the fact that he serves a sovereign Father, and he knows his Father has this. I think there's a part of him that as he wakes up, I'm sitting there thinking, guys, do you really think this is how the story's going to end? Do you really think God came from heaven and the divine birth and all that he's experienced and all that he's overcome and all that he is still yet to do, and the story is going to end that Jesus sunk in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, never to be heard from again and forgotten in history? He's got this absolute confidence in the sovereignty of God. Here's the question. If Jesus is not concerned, if Jesus is at peace, shouldn't I take my cues from him? This is the hardest lesson in it, is can I actually let his peace become my peace? Can I actually let his activity become my activity? And if he's not concerned, should I be so concerned? And I say this especially because if we're honest with ourselves, most of us, it's not just the actual storms we face. Most of the time, it's the worry storms that we come up with. When we wake up in the night and we start thinking about all that can go wrong, and then they're going to do that, and then if this happens, and we start creating, a lot of times, storms we never experience, but we live them again and again. See, here's what we realize. Fear reveals the limits of our faith. When you come to that place of that fear, it starts showing us, okay, what is my faith really in? Is it in my ability? Is it in circumstance around? Is it in what I think God should be doing? And we have our own set of fears that go with that. Chapman University does a survey every year across the U.S. of the top 10 fears in the U.S. And 2024 is the last year they did it with it, the last list of it. I mean, if you look at the list of fears, the number one fear in the U.S. last year is corrupt government officials. Not surprising. Number two, people I love becoming seriously ill. Number three, cyber terrorism. Number four, people I love dying. Number 5, Russia using nuclear weapons. Number 6, not having enough money for the future. Number 7, U.S. becoming involved in another world war. Number 8, North Korea using nuclear weapons. Number 9, a terrorist attack. Number 10, biological warfare. I go through a list like that, and kind of my first thought, maybe yours with it, is like, well, those are things worth being afraid of. Those are bad things, and they are. They are. Jesus never says in this story it wasn't a bad storm. He never questions them over that. Everything about this story is just, what are you trusting more, though? And the link between where I'm really putting my faith and fear is actually a tool that God can use to help me see that and to learn from it. Look at verse 39 as he reveals his power. He awoke and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. We often picture this, and you'll see it that way, like he stands up and he's having to scream over the wind. You almost picture it like Gandalf. Remember Gandalf in Lord of the Rings when he faces the Balrog and he screams, "None shall pass." Like Jesus stands up, "Peace, be still." Guys, that's not what this says here. He doesn't have to scream over the wind. He just needs to speak to it. In fact, if you look at it, he doesn't shout over the storm. He just speaks to it as Lord. It's so much more powerful. It's one thing if he's got to bluster and all that because I got to somehow overcome this. No, he just looks at it because he's actually the Lord of creation, so he speaks to creation just like God did when he spoke and creation existed. He can speak. And this raging storm, it says in the Greek, it suddenly became still. It doesn't mean that like he speaks and the winds start dying down and the waves start dying down and everything starts to finally get calm. Oh, phew, glad we got through that. No, he looks at it, he says, "Peace, be still," and it's gone. He has that kind of control. He has that kind of power. I'm sure it had to be eerie for these fishermen who'd spent their whole life on the sea. And they've never seen this. Now, part of what he is doing, and part of the reason Mark has this here for us, all of these stories are here so that we start getting a clear picture of who Jesus is. And what he's showing in this isn't just a miracle of power, it's a revelation of his identity as the Lord of creation. He's revealing who he is. That's why we read these stories. That's why, by the way, if you're a parent, you should be reading these stories to your kids. You should be telling them. We are discipled by the stories of what our God did. And I would just challenge you, please don't let your children be discipled by devices. They need to be discipled by parents who share the stories of a living God who can speak and it goes still. And for the disciples especially, and for the Jews, the Jewish people, the sea, if you read through it, was always a place of chaos. It was always a place of uncontrol. It was always mysterious and scary. And so there's several Psalms, if you read through the Old Testament, where God exerts that he's actually the one in control of the sea. I love one of them is Psalm 89:9. It says, "You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them." I love because this psalm is not just poetic, it was actually prophetic. It's speaking of that day when Jesus would do this, that he's the God of creation in that way. And then as he brings it to a close, look how he links it together. I want you to look at verse 40 especially. Look at the two questions Jesus asked. He said to them, 1, "Why are you so afraid?" And then 2, "Have you still no faith?" Notice how he links those two together. 1, he looks at them and says, "Hey guys, why are you afraid?" Notice what he doesn't say in that. He doesn't say, guys, why are you afraid? I've seen storms worse than that. You thought that storm was going to take us down. Oh, why are you guys, you scare so easy. He's not saying that. He never diminishes the impact of the storm. He never acts like it wasn't a big deal. He says, why are you afraid? But then notice he says, don't you have faith? Yeah, it's a bad storm. Yeah, it's scary. But I'm greater. And I'm with you. And as you stick with me, you'll start to learn to take your cues off of how I treat these circumstances instead of what comes naturally to you. Look in verse 41. And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Isn't it interesting? They go from being afraid of the storm to now being afraid of him, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. It's not the kind of fear like they're terrified of him. It's what Scripture actually speaks of. The fear of the storm is replaced by the fear of the Lord. Scripture tells us the beginning of all wisdom, the beginning of all trust. You need to start with the fact that he's a big God. He's a powerful God. That he's so big, he's bigger than anything I've ever seen or faced before. He's so big that he can do things that I can't quite even control. He's so big that the disciples are left, they're looking at the boat and they're going, who is this? See, this healthy fear of the Lord that is the founding place for building that trust. And as you do that, it's the reminder of how strong he is, that faith is not the absence of fear, it's learning to trust the one who's more powerful. It's not that you're not going to face things in life. You're going to face things in life that are scary, things in life that we gulp. We can go through the list of the 10 things and even more. The diagnosis, the devastation, the difficult storm that, frankly, some of you have been in for a long time. And in that process, it's despite what I'm seeing and experiencing, can I learn to trust him more? Can I learn to take my cues off of him? And if he is at peace, can I be at peace? Can I trust in that moment? I remember when my kids were little, sometimes we'd be watching a movie, you watch a Disney movie, and it could be, Lion King with Scar suddenly shows up and it's pretty scary. Or Little Mermaid with Ursula, whoever the villain is, they were pretty good at making them scary enough, especially if you have young ones. And it would always be interesting, you'd be watching a movie with the kid, and suddenly as the movie starts to get a little scary, suddenly you don't even realize it's happening. You look down and there's a child in your lap. Where they are like, we are going to watch this, but you are going to be wrapped around me. And what they're saying unconsciously is, you're my safety. This scares me, but you're stronger. I need you wrapped around me. Guys, that's what that word, when you read through the Psalms, that word, you are my refuge, that's what that means. You're that cleft in the storm. You're that place that I can go to. You're the tower. You're the pantry I go in when the tornado's going. You're the strong place. You're the refuge. Where like a child on the lap, I find my safety and my trust in you. And God will actually lead us into storms so that we learn that about him more. So that we learn to trust him more. See, we want a storm-free life, but one, we don't live in a storm-free world. Not on this side of eternity. And two, God actually uses the storms in our life. And he's forming us through them. Back in the 1980s, I don't know if you remember, there was an experiment they did called Biosphere 2. They went down in the desert and they were going to build a community. It was supposed to be the kind of community that we could build in space one day. And they had all these biosphere domes and pods, and they spent, I forget how many millions on it. They got just the right team that went in there, and they were going to live in there for a couple of years with it, and the plants and the trees and all with it. The thing broke down. First of all, the team wanted to kill each other after a little bit of a while. The other thing, though, is they started having trouble. One of the things they noticed and they were surprised by is trees started falling. And they couldn't figure out why. They were like, do we have the right soil? Yeah. Is it getting the right nutrition? Yes. It's getting enough sunlight? Yes. There's no mites or weevils or anything that's taking it out. They checked everything. You know what they finally figured out? The reason the trees were falling? There was no wind. There was no adversity. And a tree that grows up, the natural winds of the world make it stronger and more resilient, makes the roots go deeper in the face of the wind. And because of that, in this perfect environment, they didn't have the roots to stand. And I say that because when you face a storm, and when you're in the storm, the enemy wants you to focus on the storm, focus on where's God, focus on all the fears, focus on the things. And just stop in that moment and actually trust God, you are with me. And you're actually using this to make my roots go deeper, to make me more resilient. As you look at the storms, just kind of three things. Just realize storms often expose what you trust in the most. God is using it right now. Do I trust you, God? Am I resting in you? It's fascinating to me that Jesus took them into this storm in the place where four of the disciples probably felt most confident. Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Then they'd lived their life on that sea. They had expertise. I'm sure when Jesus said, I'm exhausted, let's get in the boat, they were like, we got you, Jesus. This is our domain. Little did they know how quickly they would be looking up going, Jesus, if you don't do something, we're in trouble here. And I think so often God in the storm starts stripping away the things we thought we had, the things we were relying on, the things we actually trusted more than him. And I'll admit it can be an excruciating process of coming to that. And giving it to him and believing it. But it's so valuable. The storm will teach you that peace only comes through the presence of Jesus. That's the main thing it'll teach you. Peace will only come from him, and it needs to be the kind of peace that he has, the kind of peace that he modeled, not even the peace that we think it should be. Listen to the words of Henry Drummond. I love these words. He says, Christ's life outwardly was one of the most troubled lives that was ever lived. Tempest and tumult and tempest, the waves breaking over it all the time. But the inner life was a sea of glass. The great calm was always there. Christ's ability to sleep in the midst of the storm helps us see a new dimension to the peace of God. John Kessel adds to this, he says, we usually think of the peace of God primarily as something we experience. We think of a peace that we receive, a peace that passes all understanding. But our experience of peace must ultimately have its origin in God's own peace. Our peace depends on him. God is not anxious. God is not afraid. God is certain of the future. The wind and waves that are so troubling to us cannot reach him. And I love this line, though he may be removed from them, he is not unmoved by them. We serve a God that no wind, no wave, no storm, no adversity, nothing in life can touch them. He is not moved by them. But it does not mean that he is unmoved. It does not mean that he does not care. And coming to grips with those two things, that God, when I am facing this storm, and I'll be honest with you, I don't see a way out. I'm scared to death. But I'm choosing to believe in this moment you are at peace. And if you're not moving in this moment, I've got to trust you're doing something in this and through this that even though I can't see, I trust you with it. And I believe you actually care. And giving it to him. And I would say not just in the storm, I would say maybe one of the ways that most people could do this the most is in the storm of worry, the storms that we create, the storms that wake you up in the middle of the night, and you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, and you spend, the first hour kind of worrying through everything. And here's what Satan loves to do. He'll spend an hour with you having you worry about everything, and then he'll do another hour where you beat yourself up for worrying. Where you tell yourself, if I was a better Christian, I wouldn't do that, and then that causes new worries. What if you stopped in that, and instead of beating yourself up for it, you actually looked at it as an invitation that God wants you to spend time with him and just learn to trust him more. And it'll be a process, by the way. He's very patient. He doesn't have this expectation you're going to have one session tonight and then it's all done. And so as you wake up, instead of going through your laundry list of worries, what if you started getting some scriptures out like the different Psalms that talk about God being your refuge, God being above the storm, and just started rehearsing scripture? And every time you find yourself worrying, go, God, I'm doing it again. Hey, make this more true in my life than what comes naturally to me. And treat it instead of like this place of failure in your life, as a place where your Father loves you so much. He'd love nothing more than having that time with you. And he loves nothing more that even in your worry, if you'd crawl in his lap and you just let him be refuge. You just let him be strong for you where you don't feel strong. Final thing I'd just say, storms today are training you for the ministry God has for you tomorrow. God will use this storm, not just in your life, but I promise you this, because I've seen it happen over and over again in church. I've seen somebody who's in the storm and they kind of speak up and they go, man, I am in a storm in my marriage. And they start describing it and somebody else is able to go, oh man, I have been through that. Can I tell you what God did and how he walked me through it? And they don't always end like this tied up in a bow, perfect stories. But they saw God in it and they're able to speak into it. Oh, you're struggling with your kids? Man, we've been there. Oh, you're at that place business-wise? Oh, man, I had a similar circumstance. And the power of that. I've got some friends in ministry that lost everything. Lost their church. There's disruption in their family. Went on for years. Horrible circumstance. And I was with them a couple of years ago as a couple with other pastors, and they were sharing of just the journey they'd been through. And she was sharing and just said, every time I thought we hit a new low, something else would happen and it kept going lower and lower. And she said, I was at a place where I was ready to just let go. And I kept watching my husband. And I kept asking myself, is he going to keep holding on to Jesus? Is Jesus enough for him? Because he's preached it for years. But now that we're at the lowest place you could possibly be, is Jesus still enough? She said, we're here today and my faith is whole because he never gave up. And through all of it, the consistent message he would say is, as long as we have Jesus, we have enough. I'm going to tell you the power of that testimony in the room. If you are going through the storm, God is using it, whether you see it or not, one, maybe just to teach you to curl up in his lap more, to trust him more. But I promise you this, the day will come where you will be able to even use this in speaking into somebody else's life. And you will say these words to them. You will say, Like many of us have said who've gone through things, I never want to go through that again. But I would not trade what God taught me through it and how he used it for anything in my life. May you know that truth as well. In fact, as we finish out, we're going to finish a little bit differently. We're going to finish the time just to contemplate and to pray a little bit, but I'm going to use a few verses out of Psalms that I want to read over you while you have your heads bowed and allow you to pray through it. And then we're going to go into a time where the worship team will lead us in song, and you might just want to listen to it as they sing over us. But I would ask if everybody, if you would bow your heads, and even if you're not a praying person, if you just close your eyes out of respect for others. For those of you who are in the storm today, these are verses for you. For those that the storm may be coming tomorrow when we least expect it, these are verses to take deep. The psalmist says in Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Would you just take a moment and just sit with God? Actually believe he is your refuge, that he's wrapped around you, that no matter what you face in front of you, he is stronger, he is able, and he is good. He actually cares. Just sit in that truth. It says in verse 2, therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. Would you confess to God right now, Lord, I choose not to fear because I trust you. And maybe that's hard because the sea is raging around you. Maybe it feels like the mountains are crumbling everywhere around you. Confess it again to him. Say, Lord, I will not fear because I trust in you. Verse 10, he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us, and God is our fortress. Just be still before him. Confess to him, you are God. You are mighty, and you are my fortress.